I recommend that you play Christine Love's Digital: A Love Story before watching this video if you have an interest in experiencing the game unspoiled. It takes in the realm of an hour to complete and is completely free. Digital: A Love Story manages to give me nostalgia for a time I wasn't alive for. A time capsule of 1980s internet communication with a dash of tragic sci-fi romance. It is the sort of narrative that manages to both creatively demonstrate a certain time and set of subcultures while telling a clearly fictional but emotionally relatable story. The interface and aesthetic of the mechanical interactions give the entire game's narrative a sense of engagement that would be hard to replicate in any other way. Manually entering BBC phone numbers, responding to individual unrelated messages on the various boards, downloading and running unknown programs, Digital effortlessly taps into a familiar groove that I imagine most heavy internet users can relate to on one level or another. It's from this simple but near universally, at least likely to anyone watching this video, relatable set of basic mechanics rooted in how people actually use the internet at the time the narrative takes place that allows the game's writing and characters to be more interesting and impactful than they otherwise would be. The characters have no face but their handles, but they somehow manage to be identifiable merely by the manner of their writing. None of them are complex, besides the story's only primary figure soon to be acknowledged, but they brim with personality and character. The most memorable person you meet in an online community. Imagine every community is just 5 of those guys, or girls, or AI. This is the internet of digital. The personas are numerous and their handles interesting and entertaining. You see but a smattering of their communications across the game's various message boards. But through their posts and their interactions with the player character, they retain an allure that makes them interesting to wonder about even after the game's narrative is complete. Their anonymous mystique is preserved by the aforementioned lack of complexity, but also by the player character's extremely one-sided interactions with them. Sending messages is a large part of the narrative's progression, and while the player is able to read the incoming messages the player character receives, they aren't privy to the player character's outgoing messages whatsoever. This writing decision asks the player to both make inferences about what their avatar is saying to the other characters inhabiting the game's story, but also to imprint themselves on the player character. They have no name but what you give to them, no identity beyond what you attach to them. This reinforces the connections to the game world. Player engagement continues to be the central pillar that the rest of the game's systems and story revolve around. Amelia is Digital's central character, although like all the others, her interactions with the player are one-sided. Something about her authentic demeanor makes her stand out from the others and easy to connect with. Her handle is seemingly just her real name, provoking an ironically immediate human connection in the player's mind. If handles are costumes, hers is a smiling face in a sea of masks. It is a strong grounding point for the player. Obviously, the central narrative revolves around her disappearance and the circumstances that arise after she is found, but more than that. You want to find her, because although the communities of Digital are interesting, entertaining, exciting, she manages to be what occupies the mind, the lighthouse in a fog of performance. She felt genuine in a world of acting, masks, scripts, and lies. This is true when her conversations with your player character can hardly be called conversations at all, when in reality I would be hard-pressed to describe her personality in more than a sentence or two. You could criticize the writing on this point, but for a character that is absent for more than half of a game that took me barely over an hour to complete, she is impeccably written. Digital is a game that is not interested in taking up your time. I've mentioned its fairly short length more than once already. Beyond that, unless you're really struggling with a certain puzzle, the experience is quite contained and doesn't overstay its welcome. Distilling the characters and the communities they inhabit down to simple but memorable portrayals lends the game a lot more distinct moments and conversations that can lodge themselves in your memory. The mechanics, while critical to keeping the player engaged in the experience, also lack any depth or substance to allow them to remain interesting on their own for much longer than the game ends up being. The game knows when to bow out, and the entire experience is all the better for it. For a game of its size and scope, Digital has a great deal of thematic interest to me. The writing and mechanics bolster these themes, and are strongly able to represent an exaggerated and memorable version of the late 80s internet. But what manages to keep me thinking about the game, and what urged me to replay it recently, after not having considered it much for several years, are the elements of communication and connection. I'm a generally introverted person, prone to spending long periods of time alone with a beer, and a pen and a legal pad, considering a game I recorded footage of 2 months ago, and how to put into words what makes that game brain food for me now more than ever. Communication and connection may come naturally to some, or most, but for me it is an exhausting process of self-delusion and deprecation. When the credits of Digital: A Love Story roll, I feel as if I was able to have a calculated and considered hour that reflects the most exciting and most horrifying parts of human intimacy in the new age of the internet. We may have just been playing a game, but Amelia was just an AI, and dismissal is the lowest form of insult I can imagine. Leave your thoughts on Digital, Christine Love's other work, or internet socialization in general down below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you liked this video, consider subscribing to my channel and checking out my website for more content. If you're interested in conversational analysis with the edge taken off, check out my show Whiskey Time over on the Unproducers channel. And if you want to hear me ramble about games as I play them, and whatever else happens to be on my mind at the time, you can find a Let's Play channel I am one-third of called Fanopoia in the description. Thanks for watching.